I think most of us can agree that pretty much nobody is satisfied with where home prices are right now in the United States, unless you are somebody that bought a house a long time ago and is sitting on a ton of equity and still has pretty low property taxes, and you're thinking about selling right now and 10xing your money. Unless that's you, you probably aren't happy with the current state of affairs. And what I'm about to tell you is going to just kind of make that worse, unfortunately, guys, because the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, a few months ago was on TV, and he says that we need to grow the GDP faster than the debt in this country, which essentially means that we need to inflate asset prices even further in order to expand the tax base. And the problem with doing that is it doesn't fix the underlying issues that we have in this country. You know, their solutions to continuing to keep this economy going always involve printing more money and adding more debt to our national debt rather than try to go in the opposite direction for a change, even though the current trajectory is completely unsustainable. And the problem with this concept is when they grow the economy, it makes it so that your house and other assets go up on paper anyways in value, so that way they can tax you more. Ask anybody who bought a house in the last 5 years how much they have seen their property taxes go up, and I guarantee you everybody's going to raise their hand and say it went up quite a bit more than I thought it would. Because higher asset prices equals higher property taxes, higher capital gains taxes, and higher cost of living, even if your purchasing power doesn't improve, which it's not for most of us. And this is how your house can end up paying off America's debt, or at least their attempt at it, okay? First of all, we have the inflation tax, which means they print money and your house goes from being worth $300,000 to $500,000, which is something we already saw happen, right? Those days are kind of over. They would have to print significantly more money to see another wave of this bubble going even higher, because home values are already crashing across the country as today's buyers just cannot afford today's prices. When your home value goes up, you pay higher property taxes and you pay higher capital gains taxes if you sell the house, if you're eligible for capital gains taxes. And then, of course, if you can't pay your property taxes, the county will put a lien on your property and you could be facing foreclosure. And that's something we're going to talk about later in this video, because foreclosures have been spiking recently. And then, of course, every time somebody sells their property, whether it's against their will or not, you might potentially have those capital gains taxes. There are transfer taxes, recording fees, document stamp fees, all the crap that goes along with closing on a property. And then the new person buys it and it resets at an even higher tax base, assuming the property sold more than it sold for the previous time. And so who wins in this scenario? The government wins every single time because they are taxing you every step along the way. And that's one of the strongest theories that a lot of people have out there of why home values can never go down, because the government just won't let it happen, right? Because if home values were to drop enough, then that implodes a large chunk of the economy. However, I'm not really sure if there's much they can do about it at this point. We'll see. But so far, any of the efforts they've been making have not been enough to make a dent, and home prices have been continuing to fall throughout most of the country at this point. And here's a recently sold property that shows you just how much property taxes can spike, okay? The previous owner bought this house for $1.1 million in 2018, and then they went ahead and sold it for just barely $2.1 million after asking almost $2.9 million. So they had to lower the price $800,000 to get this property sold. But now the new tax base for this person who just bought this house is $2.1 million, whereas the previous one was $1.1 million. So what do you think the jump in property tax is going to be for this person? The previous owner was already paying over $17,000 a year in property taxes. The new owner is going to be paying well over $35,000, probably closer to 40. So who wins in that scenario, guys? The county of Miami-Dade, that's who. But here's how all these home sales end up making it so that you end up paying off the national debt with your home, okay? You have the government-backed mortgages, so they print money, which means the banks can lend more against your property. because you're also buying it for a higher price. More debt secured by homes equals more interest flowing through the financial system that ends up funding government borrowing even further. And then your property becomes collateral for the national debt machine. And we can actually look at some historical examples of this. In the 1970s, home values doubled, but property taxes tripled as mortgage rates hit close to 18%. Many families lost their homes back then, not because prices crashed, but because the carrying costs, the taxes, plus the interest on the home became impossible to keep up with. And so the governments collected huge tax windfalls while the households got crushed. So the playbook here is you inflate the asset prices, you tax the gains on those assets, you force the sales by having property taxes and carrying costs too high, and then you rinse and repeat. And we can literally see this happening right now before our eyes. So what can you do about this as a homeowner or a would-be homeowner in the future? Well, the first thing that you can do, which I always tell people to do, is to challenge your property tax assessment. It's not a guarantee you're going to win, but it's worth a try. And I always have a link for this down in the description below. I personally use Ownwell to do it for myself. They do it on your behalf, and I highly recommend checking them out. But the problem is most homeowners never challenge their property tax bill, and those who do try to do it themselves, and they end up losing a lot of times because they don't have the proper evidence. And like here in Miami-Dade, for example, the window when you can actually challenge your property taxes is so small. I mean, it's ridiculous. You get a notice in the mail in September by like the first or second week of September, and then you only have till the end of the month to protest. So there's like a 2 or 3 week window at best to protest. So they really don't want you to do it. You know, they don't give you a whole lot of time to gather the evidence. You got to basically be ready for a protest before you're even allowed to do it. That way you can do it on time. And then of course, if you are an owner occupant in your property, you should always have a homestead exemption, max out any homestead exemptions you might be eligible for. Like here in Florida, you have it just for living in the house, but also you might have it if you are a veteran. You can have it if you're over the age of 65, you're a senior citizen. There's different homestead exemptions you might qualify for.